My entry in the Local History Awards a couple of years ago was a reflection on my mother's life, and I called it 91 Amazing Years. And I'm very pleased to say that I could update it now to 93 amazing years. Mum is still with us and she's quite well, a little less mobile than she was. So this is somewhat of a tribute to my mum. Victoria Park, its sights and surrounds have always coursed through the being of my 91-year-old, now 93-year-old mother, Jessie. Her grandparents had arrived in Western Australia from Scotland in 1913 aboard the Zealandic with their 5 young children and spent their first months living in a canvas tent. They eventually bought some land from Peat and Company in Carlisle and they farmed the land with 2 cows, a horse, chickens, growing maize, peanuts, almonds, muscatel grapes and, according to Mum, the most wonderful Black Adam fig tree. Their youngest daughter was also named Jessie and she married William Holmes, my grandfather, in 1929, and the 2 young teenagers set up their first home in Westminster Street, just a couple of streets over. It was at the nearby Sister Seaborn's maternity home on Berwick Street, near the corner of Mackey Street, where Nurse Urry delivered my mother in 1929. The 1930s were a difficult time for all due to the lack of work resulting from the Depression, and with another 4 children arriving before the end of the decade, the young Holmes family moved to a rented house in Sydenham Street, living alongside their grandparents. Outings to Tomato Lake and Como Beach often occurred, but wearing itchy red woolen swimsuits to Como Beach apparently wasn't a pleasant experience. And they were undertaken in a horse and cart. Eventually, the young family moved to another rented house, this time located at number 20 Star Street in Carlisle. At this time, Star Street was a roughly paved road. However, the intersecting street of Roberts Road was nothing more than a soft dirt track. My mum remembers 2 lines of Jarrah railway sleepers being laid end to end to create a plank road which enabled the horse-drawn carts of the baker, the milkman and the iceman to journey along without their wheels becoming bogged. And since writing this, my aunt has mentioned people also used to take the Jarrah logs, chop them up and use them for firewood. So, community-based. Mum and her 4 younger siblings spent many hours running through the bush at the top of Star Street, where they would often come across men training trotters. The children would spend hours happily making cubbies in the native woolly bushes, using broken china they found as plates and decorations for their house. They thought they were very rich. The outbreak of the Second World War saw Mum's father leave Star Street to join the Australian Army, leaving his wife to raise the young family. The children began their education and walked to Carlisle Primary School, but never without a stop at 253 Orrong Road, which was diagonally opposite the Big Tree bus stop. This was the home of their aunt Meg Spooner, who was instrumental in founding the Presbyterian Church in Mint Street, just over there. In 1942 and 43, Mum made the journey every day to Perth Girls' School, and like so many of her era, she had to leave school to help supplement the family's income. She was just 14 years old. Mum would walk from Star Street, along Archer Street, which changed into Mint Street at the railway line, and then all the way to Albany Highway to her job at Aitken's grocery store, which is on the corner of Basinghall Street. Here, my mum worked as a shop assistant, stacking the shelves with jam, flowers and sugar, and most of her wage went straight to her mother. At the age of 14 years and 10 months, Mum started work at Morris & Co. Fashion House in Pierce Street, earning 14 shillings and 8 pence a week. Mum would catch the Carlisle bus service, which was owned by Bert Armstrong and Fred White, travelling along Star Street to Howick Street, then into Gallipoli Street, onto Great Eastern Highway and across the causeway into the city. Each day after work, Mum and her siblings were expected to help their parents make and move cement bricks that were being used to build their new home on a block purchased a few doors down from their rented house in Star Street. It was extremely hard work for all the family. However, it resulted in a home that they were very proud of. Walking each Tuesday night from her home to the Savoy Picture Theatre, located at the corner of Mint and Albany Highway, and opposite Craig's the Bootmaker, Mum would spend a sixpence on a ticket to see the latest movie, and this is a really happy memory for my mum. At the end of the night, she would walk home in the darkness, never feeling worried or concerned. In 1951, Mum was married to my father at St Peter's Church of England in Leonard Street, which is just down here, by the Reverend Ralph Thomas. Mum estimates 50% of the people she knew were married in this church by this minister, and she said in the 50s it was just such a busy place for weddings and christenings. My dad was a returned serviceman, and he worked at the State Sawmill building supplies, which were located by the railway on Mint Street, just down from the side of the East Victoria Park Primary School that is there now. Dad was able to purchase a war service block of land in the Millen Estate on Etwell Street in East Victoria Park for the sum of £100. Together with Mum's father and brother, they set about building a house on the land that was a stone's throw away from the Collier and Bentley pine plantations. Mum was 7 months pregnant with their second child when she, Dad and their 18-month-old son moved into their very own home on the 14th of April 1956. Etwell Street was populated by many returned servicemen, their brides and children, providing a busy and friendly neighbourhood to raise a family in. There was a rule of come home when the street lights come on, and that applied to everybody forever. My mum saw the now beautiful and green Higgins Park evolve from a yellow sand open space fondly known as Higgins Desert. She also remembers the ungrassed banks of Fraser Park being used by children for sand sliding on pieces of cardboard. Mum never learned to drive, so public transport on the old MTT routes of 25, 27 and 28 were her way of getting about, with her children in tow, or she walked a great deal. Many times she would walk from her home in Etwell Street, which is about maybe 1.5 kilometres to, at the absolute most, to her mother's house in Star Street, Carlisle, which is about maybe 1.5 kilometres that way. Often with the children riding their tricycles. A walk to her mother's house was never complete without calling into JW's Cakes on the corner of Albany Highway and Canterbury Terrace for their delicious spice cake or jam rolls. After leaving JW's, it was a walk passing the shops of Hendricks Photography, McGee's News Agency, the Commonwealth Bank, Stevenson's Jewellers, and of course the revolutionary supermarket, Coles New World of Shopping, which was opposite. A special treat for the children was a little boat cake purchased from the Ideal Bakery, which was on the corner of Archer and Planet Streets and run by Mrs. Winnie Hunter. Towards the intersection of Albany Highway and Mint Street, and on the other side of the road were the Schofield Sisters Ladies Hairdressers, Bill Redette's Barbers and Henley the Butchers. The small cluster of shops on Etwell Street, including Mr Eager's Foursquare Market or Pete and Jean's Fruit and Vegetable Supply, provided the young family with their groceries. Anything required beyond their stocked items necessitated a walk to Albany Highway, and many, many Fridays saw Mum walk down the street, as she called it, and return up Hampshire Street Hill carrying full shopping bags. Albany Highway provided the young family with a myriad of shops and services. Mum's memory is sharp and clear, with memories of Mrs Dewar and her delicious small goods, Reynolds the Butchers, the original Sinclair's Jewellers, Hullett's Hardware, the Tip Top Arcade with Bets and Bets and Tom the Cheap, Mr Goldberg the Dentist, Manchester House, Macy's Fabrics, Miller's Sports, and the Bluebird Lotteries, with their colourful array of charity tickets secured to wooden boards by large silver bulldog clips. Mum was very involved in her children's sporting lives, and many, many weekends were spent at Central's Football Club, playing games at Higgins Park or Fraser or Raphael Park, Athletics competitions were held at McCallum Park, culminating in the Rotary Fair each spring. Mum raised 3 children with her husband of 58 years in the house he built, and she still lives there independently. She often reflects on what an amazing time she has lived through, from horse-drawn carts to seeing man walk on the moon, from being a schoolgirl knitting socks for the soldiers in World War II to seeing the terror attacks of 9/11, from a young bride to a proud great-grandmother. 93 wonderful years, all lived within the town of Victoria Park. This is the house that my dad built and the house that my mother still lives in. This is my brother Ken, who went on to play for Perth Football Club and captain Perth. And this is my sister Carol. Long before I came along, I was somewhat of a surprise 12 years later. It's on the front steps of Mum and Dad's house. That's probably about 1958, 59. And it's a gorgeous photo of the two of them. And Mum's house looks pretty much the same.
Still there?
Yeah, still there.
Nice garden in the front. Oh, well, can I ask you a few questions
Sure.
as well? So, when you were seeing the advertisements, or how did you see about the awards? How did you first learn about it?
I feel so much better after hearing Carol. I too was sitting scrolling through my phone on the Sunday evening before the deadline.
Yeah.
And I saw this ad for the Victoria Park Local History Awards, and I went, oh my gosh, that's so interesting. And I thought, Mum, nobody would have a mother who has lived 91 years in the one place. And I went, I can do that. I can write a story about Mum. And I put pen to paper, or didn't actually, I typed on my iPad. And sounds so much better, doesn't it? And I just typed away, and all the stories that Mum had told us over the years just flowed out. And I just didn't have a lot of time. That was my biggest thing. But that was my own, because it just popped up onto my phone. I actually was not aware of them, to be honest, Rosemary.
Oh, see, well then I'm glad it did.
Absolutely, me too.
I think Warren Duffy of Lost Perth and Perth Reflects is, I'm his biggest fan. or right up there anyway. So was it easy for you to know that you were going to write about your mum? Did you just sort of came to that almost straight away?
Yeah.
It sounds like.
It just sort of struck me that my mother doesn't understand the interest in her life. She doesn't understand the fuss we make of her. That it's quite remarkable to live within a, I don't know, what would it be, a 3 or 4 kilometre radius. Every major event of her life has been within this town. And I just thought, I don't know whether anybody else could actually say that. And Mum has told us so many stories, and we're a family predominantly girls, so there's a lot of talking, not a lot of listening going on, but occasionally we do catch on to things. And she told us so many stories. I love history, and it's a time that's passed and not going to come back. And as a friend of mine beautifully quoted to me, when an old person dies, a library burns down. And I think that's so very true, and we need to document these things before we can't talk to these people. So for me it was just a way of sharing Mum's story.
Yeah, and well written too. Like, you know, I've read the story a couple of times before, and I just got moved to tears. And I was laughing at Carol, well, not at Carol, with Carol at the story. Sorry, I'm and then you brought me to tears here.
Sorry.
No, it was in a good way, because it's like, yeah, it's just what a precious story that is, and this is great. So, did you? What was your sort of, how did you go about entering? Did you just sort of sit down and you knew sort of how you were going to do it? Did you have trouble with actually entering at all? Or?
Not at all. I sort of had the stories in my head. I guess for me it was forming somewhat of a timeline to explain. And most of the stories were ones that I'd heard from Mum or we'd laughed about over the years. So I think on the Tuesday, I went over and had a cuppa with Mum and got her to fill in a couple of the sketchy bits that I was. Mum is quite remarkable with her memory of names, places and people. So she was able to just make sure I had the name of the bus service right, because I just thought it was the Carlisle service. I didn't know who owned it. But she knew that. We went through the photo box and we found photos going back to when her grandparents had arrived from Scotland and were living just sort of the corner of, Archer Street and Orrong Road. They owned that block of land where the T-junction is.
Hungry Jackson.
Basically, yeah. So my family's had a deep connection with the area, but I found it really easy for this information to flow out. I guess it's almost somewhat of a love letter to Mum and her life. And my daughter the other day said, and I wrote it down because I liked what she said. She said, whilst Grandma's life has been a long and remarkably ordinary life, that's what makes it so extraordinary, that it has been such a long life in one spot. But no, it was great. I've really, really enjoyed the process.
Oh, no, that's really good. I'm glad to hear that, and it's certainly been enjoyable to be working with you on things since then too.
Definitely.
So if you were encouraging somebody, what do you think what would you say?
Have a go. I mean, I'm not a writer. I work in HR. Just have a go. Open your eyes to some different things. Your stories, whilst they may be your family's stories or your story, they are interesting to other people, even if you think they're not. They are, and we need to have these stories, from funny things like Carol's mum being attacked by a dolly, to my mum. Mine was a more traditional sort of memoir of what my mother's life had been. Some of the entries we saw on the night a couple of years ago, where they've researched people who were in the services. I won't say anything about Graham's, he's going to treat you to that. So it was just a mix of things, but yeah, have a go. It's fantastic. I've got so much more out of this than I ever put into it. It's just been wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Sharon.
Thank you very much, Rosie.
All right. Well, we'll have a pause. I'll be a big round of applause.
Thank you.